Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And with our fourth segment of the day here on the show, we officially conclude our positional rankings for the week with our defense and special teams units. Now, these are the units that get most underappreciated in fantasy football, and I know that. But this season, they've really proved to be difference makers, while with the shift in the culture of the NFL thus far, where more teams are predicating themselves on defensive prowess, everyone is getting more defensive minded, and the result is these teams that seem very well balanced in terms of their complementary styles of football. And all four of these defenses have proven it thus far. All four of these defenses, when I think about their offenses, they're really just looking for enough points to where they feel like they can lock down certain teams. Because, not for nothing, most of these teams' offenses, you won't say are the biggest juggernauts offensively in the league. These, make no mistake about it, are teams that predicate themselves, much like I said, on their defensive stability. They don't necessarily even have the biggest names either. But they are teams that I do feel like, in certain situations, can rise above their stations. They've done it all season long, and I kind of want to, more than anything, reward these teams more than just make this about matchups and things, because these really are, when you break it down, elite defenses. And so without further ado, let's give them their flowers in this segment. Starting off with a defense that played on Monday night and really wasn't necessarily the reason their team lost, but they are kind of susceptible to the big play. And they don't necessarily have as much depth as, say, other teams on this list. But the Chargers defense going up against the Saints, this one kind of feels like a matchup-oriented one, and just because the Saints don't have a guy like Kyler Murray, who is as mobile as Kyler Murray can be. And so that's one thing that the Chargers won't necessarily have to account for as much. But when I really think about it, the Chargers' defense is just so well-rounded. They're not necessarily overly good at one aspect of stopping opposing offenses. They're very well-balanced. Yes, there's not as much depth as people might think to this defensive roster, but I do like them in this matchup because of the fact that against teams who have limited resources on the offensive side of football, I do feel like the Chargers will have the advantage. And that's why a lot of people like them as a sneaky playoff team. They're not necessarily playing the best teams. And so, therefore, their defense will only really have to be concerned about, the occasional blip on their schedule where they have to face someone like a Kyler Murray who can be the difference in that respective game. But against the Saints, I'm not really worried about them. They have a pretty easy schedule to pull up the schedule here for them going forward. This week, they do have, like I said, the Saints, but next week, the week after, they have the Browns, the Titans, and they face another pretty tough team in the Bengals and the Ravens. But they don't really have to face that many, thus far, elite quarterbacks who can hurt them. They still will have to, but in this particular matchup, this feels like an easy win for the Chargers defense. Sneakily good defense at that. And then the second defense that I want to talk about that really has been a kind of case of quote-unquote no-name talent that really is performing more than the sum of their respective parts, the Broncos defense. And this one is kind of a matchup one, but let's give the Broncos defense their flowers. And kudos to Vance Joseph for truly rejuvenating this unit. Like I said, they don't have the big stars. They have guys on this defense like Jonathan Allen, Riley Moss, Cody Barton, in all three phases of their defense that can really step up. And they had 21 points last week. And this week they have another easy matchup. And this should be pretty easy sledding going forward for the Broncos. Because much like the Chargers in the AFC West there, they have the Chiefs to worry about in their own division, but if they can stay over 500 and just win the games where they should be favored to win or winnable in their schedule, then, that's half the battle here. They do have a tougher schedule coming up than the Chargers do. After the Panthers, they play the Ravens, the Chiefs, and the Falcons before, getting to the Raiders and the Browns. But at the end of the day, we have to give credit to this spectacular play of this Broncos unit, and it's one that I'm really excited to see develop throughout the season, and if they can potentially be the reason that, say, the Broncos upset one of those teams coming up in that 3-week stretch. Or the third unit that I kind of want to discuss is a unit that's really been keeping their team in games and really has kind of gone under the radar due to the fact that the Texans really haven't been a team that, has truly impressed in any particular one of their wins. They really just, sneak by teams thus far this season. But in terms of their defensive unit, it's one that I'm really excited about in terms of their overall depth and how they can affect certain games. And so, against this Colts offense, where they're overly reliant, on Anthony Richardson being able to make one or two big plays per game, and then, just trying to rely on the run game and trying to develop that as well. The Texans just feel like a unit on the defensive end that now has the resources to overwhelm their divisional opponents. Now, in tougher games, like we've seen against, the Packers and the Vikings, they really haven't looked the sum of their parts. But these are the games that I feel like the Texans' defense were meant to be able to take over. And not for nothing, I do feel like now they're becoming the reason the team is winning. They had 11 fantasy points last week. They had 3 sacks, 2 interceptions, and they still lost that game just because of the ineptitude of their offense. So in this game, where the tables might turn and, they could be susceptible to the big play, it's up to them really to determine whether or not they, really can take care of business within this division. I think they can. It's just, in these games, you feel like they're going to win. How does that translate then in the future, and this is the bigger question, to when they're wanting to make a playoff run? It's these games where you have to build that foundation. I think they will do so this week. And the last defense, don't laugh at this last one, because this still is a highly elite defense, regardless of who's playing at quarterback, what the situations on the offensive side of the ball entail. This is still a defense that, no matter what, will always help you in terms of fantasy. This is the Browns defense. And granted, this is a highly, highly, highly tough matchup for them. This is one which, you don't necessarily want to be breaking in a guy on the offensive side of the ball in Jameis Winston against a Ravens defense that, yes, are what they've been like last year, but still have the players to affect this game. But on the defensive side of the football, here's why I feel like the Browns can potentially pull off a defensive masterclass. I feel like when we look at the Browns defense and the Ravens offense, the Browns really are one of the best matchups in terms of AFC North teams to go up against this Ravens offense. I feel like the run defense isn't necessarily as well put together as it was last year. They still have a guy like Myles Garrett off the edge who can impact them, and he can line up anywhere. He can project the kick inside sometimes, and they still have, for what it's worth, a guy like Zadarius Smith for however long is going to stay there. He's had trade rumors, but if he stays, he could be someone who can elevate that interior pass rush. But then the real reason why I think the Browns defense can pull this off is their secondary. Their secondary, if you really think about it, matches up so well with the physicality that the Ravens now bring on the opposite side of the football, outside of what they want to do with their run game. Because what I saw in that win over the Bucs was these physical guys, your Andrews, your Batemans, your Likeleys, getting beyond the Bucs linebackers and safeties. But when I look at the Browns secondary, it's a long, rangy group that loves playing in different schemes. They love playing man-to-man, mostly, but even in zone, they're pretty impressive as well. So look for them to really stand up to what the Ravens present to them on the offensive side of the football. They're not necessarily going to be overwhelmed, I feel, in this matchup. No matter what the offensive side of the football does. They could lose by 22 points, let's say. And I still won't feel like, it's the Browns defense that let them down. But who knows? Jameis Winston is a great motivator, not just of his offense, but of his whole team. So maybe we'll see a motivated effort as a result from these Cleveland Browns. But until then, we'll have to see this as a very bold prediction for a defense that could start in your fantasy squad. But that will just about do it for this segment. Coming up next to conclude our show is our college football segment of the day here, previewing from betting perspective some of Week 9's biggest games, starting off with a Friday night matchup that could determine the Group of 5 candidate for the CFP. We'll be right back after this short break.